On today's show, the Nets out-tanked the Wizards by holding out 3 of their top players during a blowout loss down in D.C. Is this a sign of things to come? I'll answer that on today's episode of Locked On Nets.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to Locked On Nets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Now the #1 sports podcast network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Erik Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. Thank you for making me your first listen of the day. This show is 100% free on all those great platforms. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Before tip-off, check the FanDuel app and see what's dropping during NBA Happy Hour every Friday from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern. And on today's episode, I'm going to be recapping the Nets' 119-99 loss to the Wizards during a tank fest on Friday night down in Washington, D.C. And this is a game that answers a lot of questions, in my opinion, that some fans had about the Nets' direction for the rest of the season. You know, the Nets fans have been asking me, are the Nets tanking? What are they doing? Are they making a play-in push? Are they going to pivot to a tank? You know, Brooklyn had won 7 of 10. They were creeping towards that play-in conversation. They were at one point 3 games back at the Hawks for the 10th seed in the Eastern Conference. And then they drop a winnable game against the Warriors in Brooklyn, and they crank up their tanking urgency during these last 2 games. After Michael Porter Jr. and Yegor Dioman missed Thursday's loss to the Rockets, the Nets hold out MPJ, Nick Claxton, and Cam Thomas for this Wizards matchup, and they come away with a big loss in regards to the tank race and the draft lottery standings. And look, MPJ, they said he has an illness. Like, I'm not going to say whether or not he was sick, but he has sat out multiple back-to-backs before this, and they hold him out for that. They hold him out for that Rockets game on Thursday night, a game the Nets were probably going to lose anyway. But a lot of people question, you know, why do you hold MPJ and Yegor out for this game? Why not hold them out for the more winnable game during the against the Wizards on Friday? That would make the most sense in terms of tanking. So I think a lot of fans were confused by that, but I had a feeling that Michael Porter Jr. may sit out this second half of the back-to-back, which is how the Nets have been playing as of late, with all of the ground that they had lost in the draft lottery standings. And that is what the Nets do. They hold out MPJ, or MPJ has the illness, so he doesn't play. And then also Nick Claxton misses the game, his first game of the season due to personal reasons. And Cam Thomas sits out for injury management for that hamstring. So the Nets finally do something that makes sense tank-wise. And that has really been a rare occurrence over this last season and a half. I mean, you go back to last season, and there were a lot of times where the Nets were playing a game, you know, during a back-to-back where it was not very winnable, like that Rockets game, and yet they held out their top players, whether it's Cam Johnson or whoever else you want to say, for that that less winnable game. And then they had those guys play in the game against the worst team, and they came away with some wins against some teams that they were competing with in the draft lottery standings that didn't really make sense. And this was the gripe with the Nets all of last season, was that they didn't show enough tanking urgency up until the last really 2-3 weeks of the year. And by then it was too late, and they miss out on top draft lottery odds, and they obviously fall to the 8th pick. And now in this season, they were overachieving again, but it didn't really sting as much, obviously, because some of the rookies were showing promise. Noah Clowney was showing progress. Michael Porter Jr., a player who could potentially be a part of the future. Nick Claxton, same things. Those guys are showing promise. So it was more pieces that were going to build forward with the team potentially, and that were going to, you know, be maybe long-term fits here. So that was a better way to overachieve compared to last season. But still, the Nets were losing ground in the draft lottery standings, something that really does have, you know, a long-term, is it going to be somewhat of a detriment long-term, obviously. And after this loss, with the Nets punting this game, they're now 1.5 games back of the Wizards for 4th place in the draft lottery standings, because Washington has won now, I think this is 6 of their last 10 games, so they're starting to play better basketball of late, and it makes sense for the Nets to try to lose this game and to gain a little ground in the draft lottery standings, because it's a huge difference from where they were. I mean, the Nets were sixth in the draft lottery standings after they had won that those 7 out of 10 games. They were on that 3-game winning streak. And now you look, they're creeping up towards that 4th spot. And the difference between being in the 6th spot and the 4th spot, it's a big difference in terms of the odds. I mean, you look at the 6th spot, there's a 37% chance of being in the top 4 in that 6th spot. And you get up to 4th, there's a 48% chance. So it's an 11% difference. And all of those odds make a big difference, especially when you look at a draft, when there's 4 guys, Darren Peterson, AJ DeBansta, Cam Boozer. Now Caleb Wilson is playing very, very well. Whoever else you want to say, like, you just want to be at the top. As I said, this makes sense for the Nets to try to go about this. And I know that there's some fans that, were really buying into like the 7 out of 10 wins and they'd won 3 straight. And some of the young guys are showing progress and, screw the tank. You should just go for the play-in and whatever. And like, I've made it clear that if that's your viewpoint, I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. If you feel like winning games has more of a value, if you're somebody who values that culture and you're against tanking, that's totally fine. I just have a little bit of a different viewpoint. I don't think that it's meaningless to win games, but I don't think that this is a Nets team that should be doing everything it can to win 32 games. Because look at last season. The Nets had 26 wins. They won 5 or 6 games, probably more than they needed to. And as a result, they lose out on a guy like Con Knipple or VJ Edgecombe, those teams that finished ahead of them in the draft lottery standings. And a lot of people say, look, it's a lottery. Nothing's guaranteed. Like, the odds are flattened. And do I think that, there's less motivation amongst some teams to tank because of the flattened lottery odds? I do think that that's the case, but still, look at all the teams that finished ahead of the Nets in the draft lottery standings last year. They all picked ahead of the Nets, and they got players who you could say, have a higher ceiling or at a higher level right now than Yegor Dioman. And it's no disrespect to Yegor, but guys like Con Knipple, VJ Edgecombe, they're a different tier of player than what the Nets ended up with. And Yegor can still end up being a good player, but you want to be higher. You look at a guy like Trey Johnson looked good. Jeremiah Fears has shown promise. Like, whoever else you want to say. And even if the Nets liked Yegor more than those other guys, they could have traded back and gotten more assets. So that's the point. The point is that you want to maximize your odds. You want to maximize your floor. You want to give yourself the best chance to be at the top of the draft lottery standings. And the Nets are taking a significant step towards doing that with showing finally some tanking urgency in a game like this, a back-to-back, kind of trying to regain some ground after the grounds that they lost in these games. And that's, they need a top-tier talent. Like, I've been through this, and, I'm going to keep saying it because, like, this is a franchise that has never had that guy. And I know that fans are used to, like, having the spunky, overachieving team like the Nets did in 28-19. Like, I saw a fan, I forgot who it was on Twitter, but if I find it, I'll shout you out. But they put up a graphic, and it was so true. It was like going in a circle, and the different points on the circle were trade away all your picks for a star, it implodes, spunky, overachieving team, trade away your picks for a star. And it was like going in a circle. And if the Nets do that again, I'm not saying it can't work out if they miss out on a top tier draft guy and they trade some stuff for a star. Like, I'm not saying it's not going to work out. It could have worked out the last time around, but it seems like that might be the vision that some Nets fans have for this. And look, if the Nets do win and they overachieve and say they were to make the play-in, like, they could pitch that to stars. But I've said the more sustainable route, the better route, the more clear route to getting a top-tier talent is getting one of these top guys in the draft and pairing them with the draft class that you already had, some of the other pieces that you have, and building forward with cost-controlled guys on the roster, a ton of assets moving forward, a clean cap sheet. Like, that is the way to do it. And that looks like, if the Nets can go about this the right way for the rest of the season, they'll at least have a decent chance for that, better than they did last year. And this is a draft that is even more highly regarded at the top than last year's was. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Nets navigate this. Michael Porter Jr., as I said on the last episode, with him out of the lineup in these last 2 games, like tonight, they held multiple guys out, so it really doesn't matter. But like I said, during that Rockets game, as soon as you take MPJ out of the lineup, the whole offense implodes. So it's going to be really interesting to see, with the Nets showing a little bit more tanking urgency during this back-to-back, does that extend to the point where they're maybe thinking, or not maybe, they're going to think about it, where they actually do pull the trigger on an MPJ trade closer to the deadline? Because there's going to be a lot of interest in him. This is obviously a sell-high opportunity, and as I've said, it's going to come down to their evaluation of MPJ. Do they see him as a long-term fit? Are they comfortable extending him beyond this current deal at a contract probably above maybe $30 million? Is that a contract that they feel comfortable with his injury history? Do they think that will maintain value moving forward? We'll see, and if that's not the case, do they look to sell high on him? And that would obviously bolster the tank. But this was a good loss for the Nets, at least in terms of the draft lottery standings and their tank outlook. So it'll be interesting to see how they handle it moving forward. But with the Nets holding all of these guys out, there were a lot of rookies who got a lot of opportunities. Some played well, some struggled. So what did I see from those guys, and what should fans be looking for from them moving forward individually? I'll get into all that when I continue Locked On Nets after a quick break. Guys, Fridays already feel different during basketball season, and FanDuel is making them even better every Friday night. Before the games tip off, FanDuel gives fans a new way to kick off the weekend with NBA Happy Hour. NBA Happy Hour is your official pregame, a limited time window where special offers drop right inside the FanDuel app before the action starts. Fridays from 6 to 7:30 Eastern have become appointment viewing with NBA Happy Hour. Opening the FanDuel app during Happy Hour always brings something new, boosts, bonuses, and surprises. It's easy to check the weekly special before tip-off and make a move before the window closes. The timing is perfect right before the games and right before the weekend starts. It adds extra energy to Friday night without overthinking it. So before tip-off, check the FanDuel app and see what's dropping during NBA Happy Hour every Friday from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern. A little basketball, a little action, and a whole lot of Friday energy. That's NBA Happy Hour only on FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Coming back from the break on today's Locked On Nets episode, recapping Brooklyn's blowout loss during a tank fest down in Washington on Friday night. And with MPJ, Nick Claxton, Cam Thomas all out of the lineup, the Nets had a lot of rookies who played a lot of minutes in this game. Some of them played well, some of them struggled. And the one I want to get into first is Nolan Traore, who had, I thought, a really nice bounce-back game in this one. Nolan struggled on Thursday during that loss to the Rockets. He was 1 of 8 from the field. He was settling for a lot of three-pointers. He wasn't really getting downhill and attacking the paint. And Jordi Fernandez kind of challenged him at the end of that game. As they were walking off, he had some choice words for Nolan. During the press conference, he said that he felt that Nolan didn't use his gifts. He said he felt like he wasn't being aggressive enough. He wasn't penetrating the paint, getting downhill, collapsing the defense. He said he was settling for too many threes. And in this game, Nolan comes out and it's a complete 180. He completely responded to the coaching that Jordi put forth. And Nolan in this game, he had 12 points on 4 of 7 shooting from the field, no three-point attempts with 5 assists and 2 turnovers. And that game against Houston, as I said last night, was really the only stinker that Nolan has put up since coming up and cracking the rotation. And he really responds to Jordi Fernandez in this one. He was getting downhill a lot. Getting downhill, not at will, but a very good amount in this one. He had some really nice drives to the basket where he got a step. He blew past some guys. He was able to contort in the lane, finish high off glass, finish with some up and unders. It was just a nice overall driving display by Noah Clowney in this one. He had one drive to the rim in the second half that I thought was really, really nice. He got the ball at the top of the key against Alex Sarr, no slouch. He looked great in this game. He's obviously going to be a good player in this league for a long time. And it's a mobile, shot-blocking, athletic big. And Nolan got the ball at the top of the key. He kind of hit him with a little hezzy to the left. He crossed back to the right. He turned the Jets on. Sarr recovered a little bit, but then Nolan finished with a finger roll with like a soft touch high off the glass, just kissed it off the top of the backboard and it drops in. And that's a play where there's just some flashes from Nolan that I see that are really, really encouraging offensively. And then defensively tonight, he continued to compete. I mean, the Nets really like Nolan's positional size. He's a 6'4" point guard, 6'8" wingspan. He's obviously very quick and he's scrappy. And this one had 2 blocks, had a steal. So the two-way, play was really nice from Nolan in this one. And then overall, just the way that he responded to this Jordi challenge, the way that he got downhill. As I said, Jordi said he was settling for too many pull-up threes during that Houston game. He actually said that, Nolan hasn't shown to be very efficient or efficient at all as a pull-up three-point shooter. He said Nolan can take as many catch-and-shoot threes as he wants, but he would really like him to try to attack the basket as opposed to settling for those pull-up threes. And Nolan does that in this one. Do I think that the Nets don't want him to take a single three? I don't think that that's how they want it. I think that's swinging a little too far in their direction. But overall, I think that Jordi is going to be very pleased with the way that Nolan attacked and got downhill. And you look at Nolan's game, he obviously has the downhill juice. He has some crafty finishing around the basket. He has an elite first step. He can play in transition once the Nets finally are able to do that. And he also, his three-point shooting, while he struggled off the dribble during that game against Houston, his three-point shooting has been much improved. He's shooting over 40% on very high volume across the G League and the NBA this season. So if you have that downhill juice, you have the passing ability, you add in the three-point shooting. The thing that Nolan's really going to need to add is the in-between game, the mid-range game, because that's something where a lot of teams have been playing him and dropping. He'll get into the mid-range, and he doesn't really look to pull up or take the floater that much. He's usually kind of stopping and looking for somewhere to pass the ball, or he's just going full tilt towards the rim and trying to finish over someone. So that mid-range game is going to be something that he needs to add, playing with a little more craft. But the downhill juice that he does have, the three-point shooting looking improved, the passing ability you can try to unlock, and the defensive competitiveness and scrappiness with the positional size that he has, a lot of things that I'm very encouraged about from Nolan Traore. And this was just another nice performance, and another performance where I think it was really important to see Nolan bounce back from a really rough performance against Houston and the Jordi Fernandez criticism that he got. Because one of the things that Jordi Fernandez has said, before Nolan came back up to the NBA, was that he thought that his confidence was really lacking early in the season. He thought that he saw during the preseason appearances, during some of the early NBA appearances and early G League appearances, like Nolan would miss a shot, he would turn the ball over, his head would go down, he'd get a little mopey, and Jordi thinks that Nolan's performance in the G League really turned that around. And we've seen a much more confident, decisive brand of basketball. And the first hiccup since he came up to the NBA, and the first hiccup of this NBA stint has been that stinker against Houston, and Nolan got challenged, and he came back, and he played a very aggressive, a very confident brand of basketball during a bounce-back effort. So really nice to see from Nolan. Rolling through the rest of the rookies quickly, Drake Powell, another guy, had a really encouraging game. It was really the most encouraging things that we saw in this one were Drake Powell, Nolan Traore, also Day'Ron Sharpe. I'm going to talk about him later. But in this one, Drake, 14 points on 5 of 6 shooting. He had a couple of really nice takes to the basket. One that I really liked, where he finally got out in transition. That has been a rarity for Drake and for all of the Nets this season. They barely play in transition because, all rookie point guards, the defense has, struggled at points and then got better, but they just haven't been able to get out in transition a lot. And that was Drake's main strength offensively at North Carolina last season, because he's this guy who's one of the fastest players in the draft. He has a 42-inch vertical. He's just very explosive. So that obviously plays when you're in transition. He got out in transition, got a kick-ahead pass off a steal from Traore in this one, and he had a play where I forgot who it was, but it was one of the more sizable Wizards defender trying to pick him up in transition. And he hit a quick crossover to his right and burst to the rim and finished up towards the rim. And he was like a blur on that crossover. Just a ton of straight line speed, a ton of agility side to side. And we know the explosive athleticism that Drake has. So I think that was a play. And there were other plays in the half court where he really showed off his driving ability, his explosiveness. He also hit some mid-range jumpers. There were a few playmaking flashes in the defense. It continues to just look very good. So I really like what I've seen from Drake, and this was another performance with him getting a little bit of an added opportunity. Played 22 minutes off the bench in this one. I thought he looked really good. Now getting into some of the rookies that struggled. Yegor Doman struggled in this one. He had 10 points, 8 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 turnovers, 3 of 12 from the field, and 2 of 5 from 3. And I think that Yegor, he had some lower back soreness. That's what he missed the Houston game for, apparently, but he comes back in this one. And I think that this is just another game where Yegor needs to be more assertive going downhill and trying to go to the rim. I think that that's just clearly been lacking. Obviously, he had the first 5 games with no 2-point attempts. He started to slowly ramp up the 2-point aggressiveness. But even with that, I just think that there needs to be more assertiveness going downhill. There's a tentativeness about him, obviously, that we've seen that has changed somewhat, but it hasn't really changed that much. And in this game, he gets up 7 2-point attempts, but there was maybe one drive out of those where he attacked the rim with some purpose. He needs to adjust his mindset. And I think that there was a play in the second half of this one that was a really good example. He made a really nice play. CJ McCollum tried to throw a cross-court pass, and Yegor jumped it, and he got a steal. And the steals and blocks have been there for Yegor this year because he's that 6'9" player, 6'10" wingspan. So he jumps the passing lane, but he gets before he even gets past half court, he's already looking for someone to pass it, somewhere to pass it. Pretty much as soon as he gets control of the ball and gets his dribble, he's looking not towards the rim, despite having a lane to the rim. He's looking to pass it. And there was a player back in transition. I don't know if it was Bilal Coulibaly or one of the bigger Wizards defenders who was athletic, but Yegor had a lane to the rim. And instead of taking it, he's kind of slowing down. He's looking for somewhere to pass, and he throws a long bounce pass across the court to Day'Ron Sharpe. He throws it backwards, and Day'Ron Sharpe ends up running into someone, and it's an offensive foul. And those are the plays where Yegor just needs to be more aggressive attacking downhill. We see with him a lot. When he turns the corner on pick and rolls, he kind of gets into the mid-range, and when he sees the defender and drop, instead of attacking, he picks up his dribble right away. And obviously, that is somewhat a product of his lack of ball handling, but you just need to attack more downhill. You need to go downhill with the intention to score, and if not to score, the intention to draw a defender so you can open up some of these passing lanes. And that's something that we haven't seen enough from Yegor. And there are the 3-point shooting is great. So he's a completely different player, but there is some shades of Ben Simmons sometimes. And I don't want to, give Nets fans Vietnam War flashbacks with Ben Simmons. Yegor is infinitely more confident offensively, as a shooter and just with some of the things he'll try to do compared to Ben Simmons. But like the sense you saw with Ben Simmons was a guy who would get out on the break. He would get downhill in the half court. And he would start looking everywhere but the rim. And that's what Yegor has a tendency to do sometimes. So I just need him to go downhill. Like, I think that is go downhill harder. I think that's the next step for him. And it's okay if it looks ugly. There are times where he has done it and has looked ugly, but he's a rookie. Like, that's what this season is about. It's about working through some growing pains. And you want to see him start to do that consistently, because the only way you're going to gain more comfort with it is doing it more consistently. And we've seen him do it sometimes. Like, I always go back to that Celtics game in Boston where the Nets won, where he had 3 drives during the first half of that game where he went and he finished up towards the rim and was aggressive going up towards the rim. And I think that he has it in him. You just need to see him do it a little bit more. But rough performance from Yegor, but he's looked good as of late, and you're going to sprinkle in, obviously, or have, a bunch of rough performances throughout a rookie season. Last rookie quickly is Danny Wolf. Came out in this one, struggled early playing the wing, actually got some center minutes in this one because the Nets only had Day'Ron Sharpe available. It was Nick Claxton's first missed game of the season, which is a great sign for Nick Claxton. But Danny mostly played the wing in this one, and he started off rough, but he finished strong. He finishes with 11 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists, 1 turnover, 4 of 10 shooting. Danny has been cool from 3 after his really hot start. He was 0 of 2 in this one, but we did see some nice drives to the basket. He had a stint in the second half where he scored 3 straight baskets over Alex Sarr, who, as I said earlier, is no slouch of a defender. So that was nice to see. And, Danny finishes strong, and we are seeing some of the ball handling, some of his ability to get downhill, and some of his ability to have some craft and be a finisher in the paint and around the basket. So that was good to see from Danny. But I want to get into Day'Ron Sharpe a little bit, because Day'Ron started in place of Nick Claxton. He had a really encouraging game in this one. Noah Clowney struggled and continued a cold stretch from 3. So what did I see from those two guys? I'll get into all that when I close out Locked On Nets after a quick break. Coming back from the break, closing out today's Locked On Nets episode, recapping Brooklyn's blowout loss to the Wizards down in Washington, D.C., while shorthanded. And someone I want to highlight, one of the veterans who I haven't talked about too much this season, is Day'Ron Sharpe, because Day'Ron started in place of Nick Claxton in this one, and he turned in a really nice performance, and he's continuing a stretch of pretty solid play over these last few weeks. In this one, Day'Ron had 14 points, 9 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 steals, 2 blocks, 6 of 12 shooting. So really stuffed the stat sheet in this one, and I thought made a pretty decent impact for the majority of the game, especially on the boards, had a bunch of offensive rebounds. And you just look at Day'Ron. Day'Ron's kind of been flying under the radar this season. It's been a little bit of a weird situation because Day'Ron, I think, had a breakout year last year. He had his best season, made a huge impact, two-way impact that we really hadn't seen from him before that, and the Nets reward him with that 2-year, $12 million contract. But despite that, you thought, that you were going to see a little bit of a minutes increase for Day'Ron this season. He played like, 15 or 16 minutes per game last season, but then you come in this season and Nick Claxton has just had one of the best starts to a season in his career, and Day'Ron is actually playing less this season compared to what he did last season, but he's still making an impact in those minutes. Like, you look at it for the season, Day'Ron's at 7.3 points, 5.7 rebounds, 2.4 assists on 60% shooting in only 16 minutes per game. He's actually playing 2 less minutes per game than he did last season. So he's making an impact. He's been efficient. He's been effective during his minutes. And you look at Day'Ron overall, like, there aren't too many areas where he has a glaring weakness. Like, he's become a pretty well-rounded player. And he's a guy who, from everything I hear from in and around the Nets organization, he's just a worker. He works his tail off during the offseason, during the season. And I think that you've seen that from the way that Day'Ron came in. He was kind of like this pudgy kid who was a real bruiser, but had some of that baby fat on him and needed to kind of mold his body into an NBA body to hold up with an 82-game season. And I think that he's done that. Like, he looks much trimmer, but he's maintained his bulk and his physique. And he looks like a guy, I think that's really served him well on the defensive end of the floor, where he's now able to do a lot of different things. Like back in the day during his first few seasons, if he got switched out on the perimeter, it looked ugly. If he had to play drop coverage, it looked ugly. He couldn't play in between 2 a lot of the time. And now he plays at the level. He switches onto the perimeter on occasion. He's able to play it between 2 and, hedge out and recover. That's something he did a lot last season. And that added mobility, I think, has really served him well defensively. And he's been able to add that mobility while still, maintaining his bulk, remaining one of the dominant offensive rebounders in the NBA. So you look at Day'Ron this season, and as I said, He's scoring well around the basket. He's shooting 60%. He's continuing to be one of the better rebounders in the league. He's averaging a career high in assists, 2.4 assists in only 16 minutes per game, has been decently efficient as a hub big man. Like, you just look at it, the interior finishing, the passing, the rebounding, obviously, is his main strength. The defensive capabilities that he's been able to add. He's a player who I think is showing some promise, and I don't think that you can shut the door on him being a player who could be a starting center moving forward. Is he going to be like one of the better starting centers in the league? I don't know about that, but I think that he could be a passable starting center or a very adequate backup, as he has been and continues to be. So Daron, another guy, it's going to be interesting to see how the Nets handle him, because you're moving towards the trade deadline. They obviously have a crowded front court. They already have Nick Claxton. Are they going to have to make a decision between Nick Claxton and Daron Sharp? We'll see. But Daron's a guy who I could see the Nets, definitely picking up that team option. I think it's a no-brainer that they're not going to decline that team option. They'd either pick it up or they could look to extend him. And I think that with that adds in questions about how are you viewing Daron's timeline versus Nick Claxton's timeline. Daron's 24, Nick's 26. Who do they feel has, more promise long-term? Who do they feel Nick has more promise long-term, but who do they feel more comfortable with the amount of money that they're going to make long-term? And do they think they can replace one of those guys with another center option through the draft, through free agency, via trade, whatever? I just think it's going to be interesting to see how Daron moves forward with this Nets team. But a really encouraging performance, continuing an encouraging recent stretch of play from Daron. Last guy I want to talk about in this one is Noah Clowney, who really struggled in this one and has struggled for the last few games. Noah had 8 points on 2 of 13 shooting from the field and 0 of 8 from 3 in this one. And Noah's just been really cold from 3. I mean, he started out cold over like the first 4 games, but then he really hit a heater and he was shooting really well from 3 and from 2, playing better defense. And over these last 7 games, he's really struggled from 3. He's 9 of 47 over the last 7 games at 16.6%. So Noah's been a streaky shooter at points throughout his NBA career, his young NBA career. But I think that he is a good three-point shooter. I think that the Nets believe in the shot. I believe in the shot. I think that he's going to be a good three-point shooter. Just, you have moments like this where you go through cold stretches. But the thing that I've really liked about Noah is, despite that cold stretch, he's still been able to get downhill. He's still attacking the rim. I said 9 of 47 from 3 over these last 7 games. He's 15 of 30 on 2s. So he's taken a good amount of 2-point shots, and he's finishing at a good rate around the rim. He's getting downhill. He's still driving with some assertiveness, and he's driving with some physicality. He's been able to maintain his efficiency there despite the 3-point struggle. So I think that that's really encouraging to see in terms of mindset, in terms of confidence, especially while struggling from 3. And I think that is the biggest change from Noah this season, is obviously the ability to put the ball on the ground, the ability to get downhill, and kind of the assertiveness that he's driving with to the basket, and the reckless abandon, not in terms of being out of control, but just the downhill force and trying to really get into people's chests and bully them. And also obviously some of the foul drawing ability. So while Noah has struggled from 3, I'm not too worried about a bad stretch of 3-point shooting, especially when he's able to still be effective as a 2-point shooter in the face of that. So it was really good to see that. But that's all I got for you guys on today's episode of Locked On Nets. The Nets, obviously, they lose 3 straight now. They lose these last 2, showing some more tanking urgency. So they got a stretch of upcoming games, a game against the Nuggets on Sunday, and then some other good teams coming up. But some teams who are battling some injuries, the Nuggets without Nikola Jokic, they got a couple of matchups with the Bulls coming up, or without Josh Giddey. So how do they navigate that tank moving forward? That is going to be a storyline to watch after what they did in these 2 games. But I'll have coverage of all that and more. If you guys do not already, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Nets on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, whether Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you enjoy the content, take a second, smash that like button, leave a comment, leave a 5-star review. Anything you can do to engage is much appreciated. But that's got the Nuggets on Sunday, as I said. So I'll have coverage of that and more when I'm back on Monday talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.